if we could just get rid of some of the most pernicious and noxious excesses, what would be the triumphs you would go for first? What would really thrill you as an objective reached? Let's look at Islam, and let's look at Islam as realistically as we can. Is there any remote chance of a reformed, reasonable Islam?
Well, isn't the present savage Islam actually rather recent? Isn't it the Wahhabi?
You have to go back quite a ways, I think, to get
only up to a point. I mean, I think there's, and again, none of us are the, whether we're equipped to do it, we're not the most persuasive mouthpieces of this criticism. I mean, it takes someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or a Muslim scholar, someone like Ibn Waraq, to authentically criticize Islam and have it be heard by people, but especially the secular liberals of the sort who don't trust our take on this. But it seems to me you have different historical moments in the history of Islam that are distinct. One where Islam really has, you have some Muslim, you have a caliphate, or you have some Muslim country which has a reign of Islam and is unmolested, but for whatever period of time from the outside, and then Islam can be as totalitarian and happy with itself as possible, and you don't see the inherent conflict and the inherent liability of its creed. I mean, Samuel Huntington said Islam has bloody borders. It's at the borders that we're noticing this problem, and the borders of Islam and modernity at this moment, the conflict between Islam and modernity. But yes, you can find instances in the history of Islam where people weren't running around waging jihad because they had successfully waged jihad.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
then
but what about women in that
exactly, the suffering of women within those borders.
Even in the best of times.
But there's obviously some kind of syncretism, and we know quite a lot now. There have been some wonderful books, Maria Monaco's book on Andalusia, for example, on periods where Islamic civilization was relatively at peace with its neighbors and doing a lot of work of its own on matters that were not jihadist. And I saw myself during the wars in post-Yugoslavia that the Bosnian Muslims behaved far better than the Christians, either Catholic or Orthodox, and were the victims of religious massacre and not the perpetrators of them, and were the ones who believed the most in multiculturalism. So it can happen. You could even meet people who said they were atheist Muslims or Muslim atheists, or Muslim secularists in Sarajevo. You could, which is a technical impossibility. But the problem is this: whether we think, as I certainly very firmly do believe, that totalitarianism is innate in all religion, because it has to want an absolute, unchallengeable, eternal authority.
In all religion,
must be so. The creator whose will can't, our comments on his will are unimportant. His will is absolute. It cannot be challenged, and applies after we're dead as well as before we're born. I mean, that is the origin of totalitarianism. I think Islam states that in the most alarming way, in that it comes as the third of the monotheisms and says nothing further is required.
Right.
This is the last. There have been previous words from God, we admit that. We don't claim to be exclusive, but we do claim to be final. There's no need for any further work on this point.
And we do claim that there's no distance between theology and
in our world, surely the worst thing anyone can say is no further inquiry is needed.
Right.
You've already got all you need to know. All else is commentary. That's the most sinister and dangerous thing. And that is a claim that Islam makes that others don't quite make in the same way.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment on that.
There's no refutation of Islam in Christianity or Judaism, but there is in Islam. Let's say we accept all the bad bits of Judaism. We love Abraham and his sacrifice of his son, or willingness to sacrifice. Yeah. We love all that. We absolutely esteem the virgin birth, the most nonsensical bits of Christianity. We think, all that's great. You're all welcome to join, but we have the final word.
Right.
That's deadly.
Yes.
And I think our existence is incompatible with that preaching.
let me just play devil's advocate for a moment, so at least we're clear what the position is.
I'd rather speak for the devil pro bono myself.
Well, okay. We can all speak for the devil. I'm sure a lot of people think we're doing just that. I, for one, think that the fact that something is true is not quite sufficient for spreading it about or for trying to discover it. The idea that there's things we should just not try to find out is an idea that I take seriously. And I think we at least have to examine the proposition that there's such a thing as knowing more than is good for us. Now, if you accept that so far, then a possibility we have to take seriously, even when we reject it, we should reject it having taken it seriously, is the Muslim idea that indeed the West has simply gone way too far, that there is lots of, this is knowledge that's not good for us, it's knowledge that we were better off without, and the fact that many Muslims would like to turn the clock back, they can't, of course. But I have a certain sympathy for a Muslim who says, well, yeah, the cat's out of the bag, it's too late, it's a tragedy. You in the West have exposed truths to yourselves, and now you're forcing them on us, that the species would be better off not knowing.
I'm absolutely riveted by what you say. I really love an instance in theory or practice of something you think we could know but could forbid ourselves to know. Because that is harder for me to imagine in a world without faith.
Well, you brought up the bell curve. I mean, if there
Yes.
were reliable differences in intelligences between races or species,
but I don't think any of us here
genders,
do think that that's the case. I mean, I think there must be something, you must have thought of something you could believe but wish you didn't know.
Oh, I don't think it's hard to dream up things which, if they were true, it might be better for the human race to go on not knowing them.
But could you concretize it just a little more?
Yeah.
I'm completely fascinated.
I mean, the hypothetical is one thing, but Christopher's asking, do you actually,
Was there
have
something
you
in
ever
mind?
suppressed something? That,
No, I haven't.
No.
Can you imagine yourself doing so, by the way? I mean, I can't.
Oh, I can imagine it. I hope it never comes up.
Well,
But-
take the synthesizing of bioweapons. I mean, should nature publish the code for smallpox, where you can just, anyone within his
exactly.
lab can.
There's all those
cook
sorts
it
of
up.
Oh, well, all right. But that wouldn't be a knowledge of which we should remain innocent.
Well,
That would be an
I
ability.
think-
That would be more like a capacity.
I think with foresight, it's certainly you can conceive of a circumstance where someone can seek knowledge, the only conceivable application of which would be unethical, or the dissemination of which would put power in the wrong hands. Or,
Yes.
I mean, but actually, you brought up something which I think is crucial here, because it's not so much the spread of the wrong of seditious truths to Islam or the rest of the world that I think we're guilty of in the eyes of our opponents. It's the not honoring of facts that are not easily quantified and easily discussed in science. I mean, the classic retort to all of us is, prove to me that you love your wife. I mean, as though this is a knockdown argument against atheism. You can't prove it. Well, if you unpack that a little bit, you can prove it. You can demonstrate it. We know what we mean by love. But there is this domain of the sacred that is not easily captured by science, and scientific discourse has really ceded it to religious discourse historically.
Well, and artistic discourse, which is
yes.
not religious necessarily.
But I would argue it's not even well captured by art necessarily. There's something in the same way that love is not really well captured by art, and compassion is not. Well, I mean, you can represent it in art, but it's not reducible to. You don't go into the museum and find compassion in its purest form. And I think there's something about the way we, as atheists, merely dismiss the bogus claims of religious people that